Hi Smarties, my name is Blair Imani. I'm an author, educator, historian, and today we're going to get smarter because we have a question from a smartie named Priyanka. Priyanka asks, Blair, what is autism and what does it mean if someone's autistic? Great question, Priyanka. Let's bring an actually autistic educator to help us get smarter about it. Get Smarter with Blair Imani. Today's lesson is brought to you by my Smarties on Patreon. For as little as $2 a month, you can become a Patreon member. You get to support my work, and we'll learn more about it later on in the video. So, what are we getting smarter about? That would be autism. And autism is defined by the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, or ASAN, as a neurological difference, neurodiversity, neurodivergence, and as we'll learn more in depth from our featured educator, Dylan Kapit, autism is just differences in communicating, thinking, understanding, processing, socializing, and those differences are okay. We have to remember that different doesn't mean bad, doesn't mean worse, it doesn't mean better. It just means different. And difference is wonderful. Dylan Kapit is a queer, trans, non-binary Jewish educator who uses they/them pronouns, and they focus primarily working with autistic youth. It's so important that we have autistic educators who are themselves actually autistic and focus on self-advocacy. But without further ado, let's get into the interview.
My name is Dylan Kapit. I use they/them pronouns, and I am a queer, trans, non-binary, autistic, Jewish special educator, basically.
We had a question from our smartie named Priyanka who asks, what is autism and what does it mean when someone is autistic?
Sure. So I rely on other actually autistic folk. So I looked at the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, which is an awesome organization. And basically them and myself think it's just kind of a different part of a different way of thinking and being and existing and participating in the world. But it's just a different brain way of existing, and not a bad one.
No, I think that's so important, and we emphasized that earlier, that different doesn't mean less than, doesn't mean better than, it just means different, and it's important to accept and understand that. And so diving right in, let's break down some truths about autism and get away from the stigma and the misunderstandings.
Yeah, so I think being autistic can be really awesome sometimes, and sometimes it really is not, and it's hard. And I think there needs to be room in the world for both of those experiences. And I think some days are harder than others, but it just is a different way of interacting with people and interacting with the world and interacting with your body. And I think there is all this stigma around being autistic, and we need to break that down. So I hope we do a little bit more of that today.
One of the questions I have personally is I see different communities discuss themselves differently, kind of across the board. Do you feel that it's better to say auties, autistics, people with autism, or autistic people? I think that from my experience, generally it depends person by person, but I think a good baseline would be helpful too.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I hear often in my work. People are kind of like, do we say people with autism, which is person first language, or do we say autistic people, which is identity first language? And my understanding generally of the actually autistic community is that majority of people prefer identity first language, so prefer language like autistic people. But kind of the same boat I'm always on with, like, just ask people their pronouns, is just ask people how they'd like to be referred to, right? There's I refer to myself as an autistic person, but someone else who is part of the community might have a different preference. And I think the general understanding is that autistic is the way to go. But I think just ask someone how they feel and what they'd like to use.
Definitely. I also think that, at least in my experience, that when folks are afraid of saying a word like disabled, Black, autistic, it's because that they're apprehensive about the negative associations that they might have themselves. Do you think that's true in terms of autism as well?
For sure. I also think, the world that we live in means that a lot of times people who aren't autistic are making decisions about language used to refer to autistic people. I really just recommend listening to what the community wants. And I think we need to do that with all communities. This is not unique to the autistic community. We need to listen to people who are part of those communities when we're talking about language used to refer to those communities themselves.
During the introduction, I talked about how I experience the world as a neurotypical person generally because I'm medicated. I have ADHD and anxiety, and I've been medicated since I was a child. And so I've gone through the world basically neurotypical. And so I would love if you could help us break down neurodivergence, neurodiversity, and neurotypical, because when I talk about neurodiversity, sometimes my students will say, yeah, but everybody thinks differently. And that's true. But neurotypical, from what I understand, represents that a lot of folks think in ways that society is built for, and a lot of folks don't. And that needs to be acknowledged as well.
Yeah, so I think that, neurodiversity is a beautiful thing. We all do think differently, but I think the difference between neurotypical and neurodivergent is that, society, like you said, is built for neurotypical people, and those of us who are neurodivergent experience the world a different way. And so I think it's important to understand that there are many neurodivergent folks, and we might experience the world in a different way, and each neurodivergent person experiences the world in a way that's different from every other neurodivergent person. So there's infinite numbers of possibilities of ways to experience the world. And I think that the neurodiversity movement really recognizes the need for that.
Because for folks who don't know, my younger sister, Chelsea, she's autistic. And growing up, we would go to, speech, language, and sensory integration therapy together. And I benefited from it too. The reason I would go with her was because my parents wanted to make sure that I could connect with her and understand that Chelsea isn't going through all these other things. Like, you can also experience it too. And I actually benefited from it a lot. I guess all that to say is a lot of things that are tools created by and for autistic people benefit everybody, and accessibility seems to just benefit everybody. And so can we dive into that? I think there's this idea of, needing something else when, we talk about disability, we talk about neurodiversity, that autistic folks have everything that neurotypical people have, and they need something extra, when it's actually no, we all deserve more adapted to our needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that going back to the example I just gave, we all do better when we are given instruction about participating in a social world. I think that so many of the things that autistic folks, have access to because they're autistic would really help everyone, right? I think a lot of autistic people have explicit training in how to interact with the world. I know a lot of neurotypical people who I'd like to get some training on how to interact with the world. And, so I think there's things that people have when they're autistic that I'm I really wish everyone were, had access to this. I think that a lot of autistic folks start therapy very young, and I wish many more people had access to starting therapy very young. I think that the explicit instruction of social cues and emotions and body language is helpful for everyone, right? We're all reading social cues all the time, and being explicit about those things and doing explicit instruction of the social world really does. It's not going to hurt anyone. And I think that, I really wish that accessibility and, things that help make the world accessible were standard in education for everyone, because I think that they don't, they're not hurtful, and they should be the norm. Because it's I want everyone to have the services and access and tools and skills that I have as a disabled person. That's what access is. It's not about disabled people getting more or better or extra. It's about creating the space for everyone to have access to these skills and tools and trainings and worlds.
One of those things that I want to dive into is stimming. And so totally new concept to me, but also not a very new concept. It's just that I had learned that what comes or what should be understood as stimming, which I would love for you to define as well to give folks context, I learned was fidgeting, not sitting still, being disruptive. And it's honestly me doodling on the side of the margin of my page, which I did religiously throughout school, helped me process. And if I understood it as stimming, maybe I would have used it as a tool instead of feeling bad for not conforming. So please, what is stimming and how does it help folks?
So stimming is actually, I think, probably not unique to the autistic community. I know plenty of people who are not autistic who stim, but it is definitely a word that kind of got famous in the autistic world. So stimming is actually short for self-stimulatory behavior, but saying stimulatory behavior over and over again makes no sense. So we call it stimming, and stimming can look like a lot of things. For some people, it's singing to themselves. I flap my hands. A lot of people rock or go back and forth on their tiptoes or make noises, or I know kids who do things with their eyes. There are all sorts of ways to stim. And essentially what it is kind of the body's way of getting itself back to homeostasis from either being understimulated or overstimulated. So it is actually a very normal thing to do. And I think that the people who stim do it kind of because their body is telling them to. And I think there's nothing wrong with it. And I know that the spaces that I wish to be in are spaces where that's totally normal behavior. But we very much live in a world where you see someone rocking back and forth in public and people give them weird looks. And so I think that a lot of the movement around like creating space for autistic folks is letting people stim and letting people stim in public and having that be totally normal, accepted behavior. I will just say that there are some people stim kind of in a self-harmy way by like biting themselves or hitting themselves. And so there are ways to that, you know, therapies and people intervene with that. But I think in general, if the stimming is not harming someone or someone around them, and it does not count as harming someone around them if they think it looks weird, that really we should just let people do it.
This has been so helpful. And one lingering kind of frustration I have in the way that autism is discussed is high and low functioning. When I would, explain if I was talking about something where the context came up that my younger sister is autistic, oh, is she high or low functioning? Does she have Asperger's? As if, there is a spectrum of what is and is not valid, how somebody should make their assumptions following whatever the answer to that is. I feel like it's really problematic to qualify people in this way. Can we talk about that?
I think people's understanding of this spectrum is that it's a very linear thing and it goes from low to high. And really, I think every autistic person exists in some like very big wheel of functioning. And some of us function better in some areas than other. And some of us are functional in different situations. And also, what does functional mean? The phrasing of high and low functioning, no one is high functioning or low functioning all the time. And so I know within the community, people are trying to use words like has high support needs at home or has moderate support needs at school, and really talking about the ways that we can support those people at different times in different situations. Asperger's was actually a diagnostic category in the DSM until the most recent version of the DSM-5. And there has been a lot of push against the use of the word Asperger's because Hans Asperger, who developed the term, was a eugenicist. And that's not good because...
Let's provide some context for folks on what that is. So eugenics sometimes is discussed as social Darwinism, but is basically the idea that there are some people who have good genes and some people who do not. And the people who do not should not procreate because they make the species weaker. That's nonsense. It connects to white supremacy. It connects to ableism quite deeply, anti-Blackness, so many different things. And we have to have an understanding, like we said at the beginning, that difference doesn't mean lesser. It means different.
Yeah, and basically, Asperger's was very much like a high functioning version of autism, according to the DSM. And also, unfortunately, functioning levels are very linked to capitalism. And who is a good participant in capitalism, who is a bad participant in capitalism. So there's just a lot going on there with like why we should not use functioning levels, why Asperger's has been phased out by the community. I think that we are really trying to work towards like everyone has the ability to communicate and give to society in different ways that looks like different things, and stop measuring autistic people by how they are functioning in different environments, and really remember that like that is very situational. Me in a social situation at a party is not great. Me in a social situation with like two friends is very different. And so just a reminder that like people who are autistic exist in different forms, in different situations, just like everyone else. Even neurotypical people are not high functioning all the time or in every place. So I think just a good reminder that we should not put people into categories and deem them worthy or unworthy based on levels of production or communication. And we're all autistic people are autistic. There's no like trying to rank us or categorize us is also not really helpful.
Can you break down what that looks like to really have actually autistic folks talking about autism and advocating for themselves versus, the idea that, neurotypical people need to advocate for y'all?
Yeah, I think that, I think that's a great question. I think really what it means is when actually autistic people are saying something, listen to them instead of looking for resources by neurotypical people on what they're talking about. I know that there are many people out there who believe that Autism Speaks and other organizations run by neurotypical people about autism are good quality resources. They're not. Organizations are like that are doing harm to the community. So I think that looking for organizations like the Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network or Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, my secret is I literally go on Instagram or Twitter and search the hashtag actually autistic and like consult with community members because oftentimes actually autistic people are not even given entry to big organizations or academia. So actually using people's lived experiences on social media to learn is amazing. There's many Facebook groups of actually autistic people educating the community. So really just looking for people talking about their lived experiences and then listening to them and consulting them when you're doing disability work and paying them to be consulted on disability work. I think it's very easy to find actually autistic people and we want to educate you. So I think just allowing us to do that and then listening to the things we have to say is not that hard.
All right, Smarties, I've learned so much about autism. So many things just kind of clicked into place for me. And I think that it's just crucial and key to do. We have to make sure that we're listening to actually autistic folks. And Dylan, take us home.
All right, everyone, this has been Dylan Kapit. Thank you so much for getting smarter with me.
Well, Smarties, I definitely got smarter. I hope that you did too. That is the whole point. Let me know in the comments below what you learned about. And remember, if we're not listening to the communities that we are educating about or learning about, what's the point? That's why I wanted to make sure to have Dylan here. And there's so much more to get smarter about. Make sure to follow Dylan. Their information will be linked below, whether you're watching on YouTube or Instagram. Make sure to keep engaging, to keep learning, to keep getting smarter. And if you have a question that you would like me to answer, you can go to blairimani.com/questions. And thanks once again to my Smarties on Patreon who support my work. You actually helped me be able to hire Dylan to do this education work, to work with Ren Fernandez-Kim, who's behind the camera. Hi! To work with Enne, LeSeure, who lives all the way in the Netherlands and does my editing work, Shelby Rassler, who does my music, and Cami Zea, who does these beautiful graphics. We have to keep getting smarter, and there's so much to see, so much to do, so much to learn. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. Well, Smarties, that's another episode of Get Smarter with Blair and Imani. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so that you can be the first one to comment on my posts. And while you're here, check out one of my previous videos. Let's keep it going.